seems like this should be a big epic crossover event that I should build up to into my King of the Summer series, but truth be told, this is technically Godzilla's third appearance in movies chronologically. That's right, after 1954's Gojira / King of the Monsters and Godzilla Raids Again, the character kind of took a sabbatical for a couple of years, starting in 1955. And it wasn't until Toho decided to wrangle in another big movie monster to potentially make a successful film about that they decided to resurrect Godzilla. Originally, the idea for this movie was proposed as a crossover between King Kong and Frankenstein's monster, or Prometheus, as it was being touted in an early script. The idea being that Frankenstein's monster or creature would have been blown up to gigantic proportions in order to take on King Kong. And a lot of studios were on board for that idea, but given the fact that there were a lot of technical aspects that weren't feasible probably for 1960s movie making, they had to kind of rework the script, and one of those studios just happened to be Toho, who said, hey, put a pin in that Frankenstein thing. We have a big monster that we haven't used in a while. Let's, have the two of them fight.
Put my money on Kong.
And so they went ahead with King Kong vs. Godzilla, which is certainly a more lighthearted approach to Godzilla, given his previous installments, and that's for good and for ill. They were able to bring back Ishiro Honda to be able to direct this project, but even he had some kind of reservations regarding making Godzilla a little bit more relatable. In his mind, he really didn't want the monsters who, at that point, were very allegorical for nuclear holocaust or for the hazards we pose on the environment, to be humanized in any way, and even he extended that goodwill towards King Kong even. He even went on to say something later on that the human characters in a King Kong movie shouldn't relate to King Kong. They should be in awe and fear of him.
Oh, I bet Kong has no chance. I'll toss you. Heads for King Kong. Tails.
But they wanted to appeal to little kids too, so you gotta kind of dumb down both of your lead monsters. And boy oh boy, King Kong vs. Godzilla is an enjoyable romp for kids, but as an adult you get a much wider appreciation of not just the movie, but of the time period that that movie was made in. Because the 60s, let me tell you, there was a lot of camp to be found in the 60s. First of all, the motivation for getting these two monsters together.
Godzilla!
Godzilla's plot actually kind of is a nice continuation from where he was left off in Godzilla Raids Again. He's been left in like suspended animation in ice for several years now until a nuclear sub accidentally crashes into him, thus unleashing him. And of course he makes a beeline for Japan, which of course a spliced in American professor explains to us his motivations for always wanting to come back to Japan, which kind of takes a little bit of the mystery or the je ne sais quoi out of Godzilla as a threat.
It's my opinion Godzilla thinks he's heading home.
But on the Kong aspect of things, it's a little bit more chintzy.
King Kong must be taken back to Barrow Island at once. These orders are final.
My Kong?
Your orders are specific.
My contract. The TV commitments.
See, there's this pharmaceutical company run by this Looney Tunes character named Mr. Taco, and one of Mr. Taco's sponsored television shows is declining in ratings. So naturally, what do you do to boost your ratings? Travel to an uncharted island and grab the first giant monster you see for spectacle's sake. Of course! Now, this is actually written into the script with a degree of satire laced through it because Ishiro Honda really wanted to have sort of a take on what was going on in especially Japanese television at the time in the 60s. Japanese television was very centered around this boisterous, bombastic, like I said, spectacle-driven, almost reality television type of mood and tone. So it's not too far-fetched given the time period that you would have an executive like this making such an outlandish, ambitious project a reality.
Who out there is watching our show? Nobody. Because it's dull and boring and without imagination. That's why. You two are going to Pharaoh. Find me a genuine monster, if he exists or not.
But at the same time, a lot of the set design and, from what I can tell, performances are feeding right into that 60s tongue-in-cheek pre-Batman Dozier camp. And boy oh boy is it no more apparent than how they portray the natives on Kong's Island. Ooh.
Look at them. Ignorant, primitive savages.
Yeah. So I hope all you white folks out there feel a little bit alleviated knowing that you aren't the only ones to kind of take blackface to so many degrees. Yeah, this part of the movie certainly doesn't hold up much with regards to its socio-political lens. But for what it is, I mean, yeah, the 60s, it was a different time, people.
Listen, I want the chief to know we came here as his friends. Tell him a big boat is coming back for us tomorrow and smile, will you?
I just love the over-exaggerated colonizer allegory here.
My magic.
Look at the magic singing box. Civilization has been brought to you, savages.
Cigarettes. Inhale. Inhale. They satisfy.
Have a couple of Chesterfields on us. What the hell? Give the kid a couple. Thankfully, there is a lot of other stuff there to kind of distract from the implications of those makeup jobs and those dressings. For example, there's an actual pretty good sequence here where Kong fights a giant octopus. Now, for portions of this sequence, they actually used 4 live octopi, blowing wind and air on them to make them move. And, well, we can look at that now in the modern filters being some wanton animal cruelty there. It looks pretty impressive for what it is. Like, it took me a while to be like, man, that's a live octopus. That's a real thing. Okay, movie. You've intrigued me. And I'll give the costume monster performers this. They are going for broke in any of the matchups they have in this movie. Back in the day, the first Godzilla King Kong meetup would kind of thrill me and give me a full sense of like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. 2 giant movie monsters coming face to face, finally. Now as an adult, it doesn't come off as these 2 titans butting heads, but more like 2 really overactive toddlers on a playdate gone awry. I especially like the part in the first meeting between Kong and Godzilla, where Godzilla gives him a good old whiff of atomic breath, and King Kong, his reaction to it isn't so much, I'm on fire, holy geez, that burned, and more like, you've given me a lot to think about, Godzilla. His retreat isn't so much like, I'm terrified for my life, I need to retreat, and more, I need to rethink some things in my life. There's a bunch of ridiculousness in this movie, to be sure, that just, it's beautiful.
That wire of yours is great. It's holding him.
And the last 10 minutes of the movie is just pure Kong on Godzilla action. I will say there's some really good moments throughout those action sequences. You get to see a little bit of the versatility between Kong and Godzilla. Godzilla is described in the movie as just relying on brute force and is essentially a force of nature, whereas Kong has been alluded to as being a little bit more intelligent, a little bit more crafty, and you see that at play. Kong actually kind of evades Godzilla for a little bit in their second bout. He's actually hiding and then uses something to his advantage, i.e., get that fucker by the tail. This movie also introduces the MacGuffin of Kong's secret electrical charge powers, because that's a thing that Kong always has had at his disposal. It is kind of funny now because I just imagine Immigrant Song playing while he's charging up, and it just gives me the idea that Kong is now just reenacting Thor Ragnarok. If that's actually done in the 2020 remake, I wouldn't be disappointed. Yeah, but let's talk about the remake, which is coming down the line here soon. There's definitely some things they can take liberty with, such as the motivation for getting Kong or the motivation for getting Godzilla. I don't think trying to capture a monster to boost the ratings on your television program would fly so much as a legitimate motivation in 21st century movies. But I would like to see some of the fighting quirks that were put into the characters way back when kind of amplified, such as the craftiness of Kong or just the relentless force of nature mentality of Godzilla. As for who winds up the winner in the 60s version, I think the movie is implying more towards Kong being the victor. At the time, Kong was the more popular movie monster. Even in Japan, he kind of outranked Godzilla as king of the monsters, so to speak. But it's still left ambiguous as to what happens to Godzilla. And I kind of hope in the legendary MonsterVerse version of this story, I'm rooting for my boy G. I like King Kong just fine, but I feel there's so much more mythology and so much more interesting ideas you can put into play. I do like the idea that he is essentially in the legendary verse a force of nature. He is the nuclear deterrent to all other forms of super gigantic life. He's the mega predator, the one that comes in to balance out Mother Nature when things go awry. So while I love you, Kong, and I'm glad to see you and the Big G got to butt heads in the 60s and are setting up for a rematch in a couple of years, I'm pulling for my main lizard to come through with full atomic breath glory. So yeah, that's Kong versus Godzilla. I recommend it for whether you want to see it for the first time and just soak in all that 60s glorious camp, or if you are, again, a big monster kaiju fan, I don't see why you would skip out on one of the biggest monster crossovers of all time. Stay tuned for next time, because we're going to start to get into more of Godzilla's expanded Rogues and Allies gallery.